So, hello everyone. Welcome to our podcast. We're going to be talking about the illegal arms trade, its reasons, how it affects global stability, real-world examples, causes, and its history. I'm Landon.
I'm Caleb.
I'm Ayub, and let's dig into what's really driving this trade and how deep the problem really goes.
Yeah. So, first thing we want to talk about is where it comes from and why this keeps happening. Now, if we go back in history, we can go back thousands of years, and the first recorded instance that I could find was during the Peloponnesian War, this wasn't really the first recorded. It's more or less the most famous, earliest example I could find. This happened in a war between Athens and Sparta, where both nations, or city-states really, were fighting over who was the main dominant power in Greece. Not only were both city-states funding rebel groups that would attack each other, but then you had Persia, or the Achaemenid Empire, that was funding Sparta to keep putting pressure on Athens, because it really seemed like Athens was going to win, and Athens was really not friendly with Persia at the time. Now, taking away all the history of it, the reason I bring this up is because if you look at the reasons of money, because the Persians got a lot of money out of doing this, because they could basically charge the Spartans whatever they wanted. Spartans didn't know how to build boats. And then you also had just keep your enemies fighting each other and not you. It's basically the same thing throughout history. Now let's take a more modern example, not exactly modern, but more closer to our time. You have the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, which, although I will say it didn't generate probably as much money for America as it did for the Persians, it did still push the American military-industrial complex to create building more weapons, more anti-air systems, more small arms to ship to the Mujahideen that they were called at the time, and these would be supplemented or really transported, not by America itself, though that did of course happen. You had the Pakistani intelligence service called the ISA, I believe, or ISI, one of the two. But
I think it was the ISI.
ISI?
I'm not completely sure.
Okay. Yeah, I think it was the ISI. But basically they would decide who got what. Now, it's literally for the same reasons. You have America wanting the Soviets to bleed themselves dry in Afghanistan as much as you possibly could, and it did work. It worked for over 10 years, and when the Soviets left, they were just completely destroyed, or not really destroyed. They just gave up on that war, really. And then a much more recent example that's closer to home for us is definitely both the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan, because the war in Iraq was definitely funded by foreign powers. Now, it's a lot harder to fully prove this, because a lot of the weapons used by the terror groups and the insurgents that fought against American soldiers were using weapons that was already in abundance in the Middle East. So it's kind of hard to definitively prove that, but come on, we all know that that's what really happened.
Yeah, I get that.
We all know. So it wasn't as obvious with America, who was openly supporting them. You even had a case of, I think, it was Ronald Reagan. He invited members of the Mujahideen into the White House for a press conference. So it wasn't blatantly to that support, because the international community really recognized a lot of these groups as foreign terror groups. So if China definitely funded some of these groups, but obviously they're not going to come out and say that we did it. Xi Jinping's not going to stand next to the leader of ISIS and be like, yeah, this guy's my best friend. I mean, he did that with the Taliban, but it's that's a little different. But yeah, so, and then regarding why this keeps happening, I remember, Caleb, you pointed out a really good research that was done, but I think the general crux of it is that when you have the UN making these laws that are supposed to bind these nations together, at best it creates a legal framework for these nations of what to do, how to enforce these laws and what to do when they have their guys, basically. The issue is that since the UN is a toothless organization at its heart, it cannot enforce its own rules. it has to rely on client nations. If that client nation doesn't feel like enforcing it or just doesn't have the resources necessary, then they can't do anything to stop it. Like a good example would be on both sides of the African continent. Like you have you actually pointed out in that article, it was, I believe it was Somalia, where I don't think it mentioned this exactly. I think it was just talking about the general overall view of it. But you have like this was a very big problem, I think, in the early to mid 2010s. There was like you all heard about
it was about the illegal arms trades. It was
Right,
about
right.
these political. They were all getting militarized.
Yeah, right.
And it was a big problem that they were going through all these trades. And you mentioned it earlier about the UN not having any. They were a toothless organization.
Right.
The problem about this whole trade is that there's no enforcement in anything.
Right.
And there's too many pros instead of the cons
Right.
to doing these trades, because all these states are getting political power, getting their defense firms more stacked and militarized.
Mhm.
They're getting more funding for their country's safety. So they wouldn't, and the UN is not going to worry about them.
Right.
So why worry about what the UN's going to do to you when
Right.
you're doing more?
Right, because as long as you stay in your country, and as long as your country has no interest in persecuting you, you're good. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
Like Victor Bout, like it took the Americans having a whole operation to get him, because obviously the Russians were not going to admit that he was a criminal. And then, Ayub, you mentioned in a lot of your research about like the most recent examples, like what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Ukraine, and those are Gaza is definitely a little different, because just like in Iraq and Afghanistan, a lot of the nations who definitely are supporting them are not going to come out and say that we are supporting them militarily. And you were saying, Caleb, with your part?
Yeah, it wasn't just about Somalia. There's a lot of different things I read, but a big one that I read was about, the whole article is called Politico. The author Ahmed bin Sulayem was talking a lot about global instability. It was going into your point about how these systems are allowing conflict to keep happening.
Right.
And it's not just about conflict alone. He points out that there's such little regulation to these weapons, and these places are already falling apart. So it's just a really bad thing in general to have more and more weapons flowing into areas in conflict zones like Gaza, Myanmar, and Sudan.
Right. Myanmar was a good
And
example.
letting these civilians take the consequences
Exactly. Yeah.
for these countries' actions.
Yeah, that's a good point you bring up. You bring up Myanmar, because that's a lot more closer to home for me, because the Chinese government is basically the reason why the current military junta in Myanmar is basically in power, because I don't know if they gave them the go ahead, but they are still supplying that government with weapons, with intelligence, with technology. And then you have like what's going on. You guys have definitely seen like the people posting on Instagram, like, don't take your eyes off of Sudan, right?
Oh yeah, that's
Yeah, I've seen that before.
Yeah.
It's about all these countries that are going in these conflicts because of these governments that are allowing weapons to flow in.
Exactly.
Sudan, Gaza, the Tigray area of Ethiopia.
Oh yeah.
Congo.
Red Sea.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh yeah. It's a good one. Like you have what was it? Oh, I just had it. Oh yeah, and then you have the civilians taking the brunt. Like in Gaza, there was this. What was it? Like a lot. You have like. Now this is honestly, I think this is more of a fault with the Israelis in general, because they hear of like Hamas in one area and then just flatten the entire neighborhood in response, which is like their justification for me is really bad, because it's like saying, it's like if someone is holding a baby hostage, you don't punch the baby to get to the guy. You know what I mean? So it's like, but
Yeah, I
that's,
understand that.
yeah, but that's a whole different topic. So I think we can segue then into the global picture, and you had some really good points with this one.
Yeah, so back to our main subject, and if we zoom out and look at the global and bigger picture here, we're gonna find out that the the illegal arms trade isn't just a crime. It's all about strategy as well and influence. It's not just some underground network of weapons smugglers. It's always connected to things
like
way much bigger politics, economics, etc., and how basically global power actually works. Like if we take the Middle East for example, researchers have pointed that the region's been shifting from a U.S.-led order into a multipolar one for decades. The U.S. has always been the setter of tone in the area when it comes to military aid, arms trades or alliances. But now we've got regional powers like Iran, Turkey, and the Gulf states making their own moves for in fighting for influence in the region. Basically, you can see that those countries are acting more independently, setting their own agendas, and you can literally see the shift in the flow of weapons, like who's selling, who's buying, and what those deals represent politically.
Yeah, because these smaller, let's just say third world countries, they got to do these illegal trades to stay up in this, let's just say, competition of defense and just making sure your military is strong and can fight off anyone else that when it's needed.
Right.
And when the government is weak, it's easy for people to take advantage of its system. Like if a country doesn't have enough money, staff, technology to actually enforce its own laws, that creates openings to weapons to slip through. Like there's always loopholes in the system. Even if the rules exist on paper, they don't mean much if the government can track the shipments or guard its borders or keep control of its stockpiles. Because those weapons, often, if not always, end up back in the hands of the people that the government was trying to stop in the first place. So we have this cycle every time where this instability fuels the illegal arms smuggling, and that trade causes even more instability. And it's not always because of corruption. Sometimes it's just the weakness of the system or the country.
Exactly, yeah. Like you have what was it like South Sudan? There's a lot of pictures of South Sudanese soldiers with like Chinese rifles, because unlike America, who will look at South Sudan, how corrupt the government is, how many war crimes the military did during their civil war, and it's like they're obviously not going to want that, because it's like seeing American guns committing war crimes. That's a terrible look for America, even if they themselves had no issue with it. And that's another point, because it's like whether the people who give out the guns should be blamed for it. That's a different discussion I feel like we should have. But regarding it, but back to the main point, a lot of these nations, they don't want to be seen as just bowing down to America and just doing whatever they tell them to do. So a lot of this genuinely just also comes from like national pride, because they don't want to be seen as weak and like just pawns of a greater power, and they'll end up eventually becoming one. Like what was it, like when you mentioned Iran, when you mentioned it, it made me think of, do you know Hezbollah and Lebanon? Yeah, I don't know exactly how powerful it is now, but I remember reading about it. I think it was back in 2022, when they were almost rivaling, honestly, like the Lebanese government itself, and there was like kind of people didn't really know like who was really the main person really controlling the country. And I know the Lebanese government has recently started working with America a lot more, so I don't know how that dynamic changed. I think we can segue back into Caleb's previous point when we were talking about the whole thing of the UN having no teeth. I remember one of your articles, I can't remember which one it was. It said something about whether this was like a design flaw or something that was like inevitably going to happen. I think honestly,
it was about this article right here.
Yeah,
it was another one. I found it in my research report actually. It was about more data and how it all connects to these illegal trade systems. This one was pretty crazy. Yeah, because the authors again, Della, it's kind of names. Della Vigna and La Ferrera.
Mm-hmm.
They were talking about how they use stock market data.
Yeah.
They use that to find illegal arms trades in around the world.
Oh,
All right.
okay.
And then
Yeah, that makes sense.
so when these conflicts flare to go up in any embargoed countries, the stocks in the arms industry in those nations tend to spike a lot, especially in the corrupt nations.
Right. Yeah, it's a good correlation. And the reason I brought that up is because I don't think that this is because I remember exactly what it was. It was like you were talking about it was one of them was like how it was questioning how news articles and just media in general portrays this as just a singular issue, when in reality this is just, I would say it's more of a symptom of a much larger problem.
Yeah,
because,
it's a system.
Yeah.
Like we were saying earlier about how this is more of an internal issue, and it's not. You can't blame everything on the conflict alone.
Right.
It's about these governments that allowed this to happen.
Right.
And they want this to happen.
Right. Yeah, and that actually goes. Oh, that goes really well into our next point with Ayub. But
Yeah, so if we take Iran, for example, it's working with Taliban. That's supposed to be its biggest enemy. They're working together because they have a common enemy. So they would rather leave their ideologies aside and work with what guarantees them the fastest solution for the moment, while it guarantees 3 more later. If we see in the Red Sea region, for example, where smugglers literally blend with everybody else, with traders, fishermen, so it's almost impossible to tell what's legitimate business and what's not. And if we see Russia, for example, in one of the articles that I have here, it's being described as using arms exports not just for business but as political leverage as well. Every sale comes with strings attached, with influence, success, maybe even a vote at the UN. It's soft power through hard weapons. We have one more case here with Libya. After Libya's collapse, Zohar here in this article shows how the weapons didn't disappear, they just rerouted. Guns that were supposed to be secured after Gaddafi's fall ended up flooding into Sudan and Gaza. It's like the system has this weird ability to heal itself. When one route gets shut down, 3 new ones open. The market adapts faster than any regulation can keep up. So if we put all this together, we kind of start to see a pattern here where instability pays off for the nations with more power than it pays off for the smaller countries that are more or less being taken advantage of. But at the end of the day, there's still benefits for both of them. Corruption isn't just a bug in a system, it's part of its design. Because when chaos exists, there's always someone who's benefiting from it.
I think personally that because of the fact that because there's really no easy solution to solving this, it's because you can't obviously hold every single customs officer accountable.
Yeah.
You can't look at every single thing that's flowing in a country. So eventually something illegal is going to get in.
Yeah.
But the best thing that we can do is just honestly hope that these nations will get to a point that they can stabilize. Like Nigeria has been, I think it's been stabilizing a lot better, especially after Boko Haram was defeated back in, well, not really defeated, more was like critically wounded back in like the late to mid 2010s, I believe, after a very big offensive. But speaking of that, when you said the conflict alone is not something to blame, I agree, but also it needs to be something that is it has to be the main cause of it.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, or
I'm
a very
just
big
saying
contributing
that
factor, yeah.
Conflict isn't the only thing that's involved in all these trades going on. It's
Right,
not the
right.
government. The government's, that's why they had to like defeat the ruler of Nigeria.
I believe our last point where Ayub, you were talking about whether the instability itself is useful to certain powers. I think that not only that, but you can also determine also who is benefiting who. Like for instance, if let's say there's a massive civil war in South Sudan and a rebel group takes over an oil field, and then suddenly oil is being sent, more oil from South Sudan is being sent to China, it's pretty obvious who's selling, or at least who is discreetly supporting that group. And I think when it comes to instability, I think it depends really on the nation, on what the specific context of the nation itself. Because normally in peacetime is the best time to do business, to, you know, mine for oil, and because obviously who wants to, you know, be a oil engineer, and then someone tells you, oh yeah, you're going to like war-torn South Sudan, like you're like, no, I'm not doing that.
Yeah, I don't know that either.
Exactly. So like, I don't care how much you pay me, like I'm not getting my head cut off on live TV or something like that. Like I'm not ending up on CNN. Like, what was it? Yeah, that's why that was meant to be more of an example to Iraq, because you all saw like in like 2015 with like the ISIS like those videos, like the very big reason nobody wanted
2015, I don't know, I was pretty young for that, so.
Oh, okay. Well,
I thought you were talking about the war, like the.
Oh, I just when I was saying that example of like that, I just meant like I was just making a recall back to ISIS and the whole.
We're at like 20 minutes. We gotta wrap up soon.
Yeah.
All right.
But yeah, I think when it comes to whether instability itself is useful, that really depends on what is going on in that. Kind of everything we had to say for our podcast. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you guys next time. See you.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.